Okay, all right. So Manish and Yusuf, thank you for joining and good morning, everyone. We're excited to host our first ever AMA and excited about the many more to come. We've actually had quite a few questions come in from the community, so we can actually get right to it from the intro. So I'm Mayank, the CEO and co-founder at Pulse. Hosting our AMA is Yusuf Khan. Yusuf has been the CIO of many leading companies, as well as an advisor and friend to many enterprise startups and CIOs in the Valley. I'm also very lucky to call him a close friend. Yusuf, thank you for being here. And we're also very delighted to have Manish Sinha. Manish, thank you for joining. Manish has been the CIO of Microsoft, UBS, Ansys, and is currently the CTO at L'Oréal. He brings a ton of experience and we're happy he's here to share it with the community. Manish, thank you for taking the time. And
thank you for having me.
All right, so with that, I'll actually drop off the video as well so the audience can focus on you, gentlemen. And Yusuf, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks to the Pulse team for setting this up. Manish, thank you so much for making the time. Good morning and good to meet you, but seeing that you're in Paris, it's bonjour and enchanté. I really appreciate you making the time. This is probably not your first international move. You are a global operator from that standpoint. So I guess the very first question that sort of comes to mind, because we all live in different geographies and of course have a different exposure to both how technology is implemented, how innovation is driven in terms of what those trends are. Could you maybe start off? I'd like to start off by asking, what are you seeing from a transition from at least the US to working for L'Oréal, but also basically being in Europe at this time and in other international moves you've basically gone through?
So very nice to meet you as well, Yusuf. It's good to be on this call. So thank you for hosting this. You're right. I have been I've lived and worked in Europe, in Asia, and of course in the US. Different flavors of how things are, right? And it's one thing to say a global role, but it's another thing to actually go into those countries and live in those countries and feel the culture and the language and all of that plays in, right? What I'm seeing or what I saw in the US, which you're familiar with, is it's always about innovation, it's about experimentation. One of the phrases I used to love a lot in the US, which fits culturally, is fail fast forward, right? Which is a Valley phrase, I guess. You learn, you fail, you learn from the failure, you move on and then do it again, right? Europe is almost the opposite. It always talks about the slow and steady wins the race, right? There is a fear of failure. And which is why you see a lot of these startups not happening here. But once the startup idea is done somewhere else, it's very easy to carry on. Asia, on the other hand, it's very energetic, very hardworking, very creative. And they are in the let's leapfrog the technology. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, they used to talk about we have more hand phones, we have more cell phones than we have PCs. They leapt a generation forward. Today, they are talking about, if you read Kai-Fu Lee's book, he compares and he says, China has moved from copycat startups to now the AI leader. Right, so they are in that. They are now harnessing that energy. They're harnessing the creativity to just leap forward. So I think it's very interesting to live around the world and just see how things are working. I have tons to share, lots of stories to share, which we can go on and on forever.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's. I think it gives a perspective which. And I think the global perspective is really important. Having also, lived in Europe. And East Africa, in terms of how technology is both implemented, driven, startup ecosystems, and how innovation is actually kind of born. I think you've really provided a very wide perspective of that. I think a lot of people forget that there is a very wide technology spectrum of how technology is consumed and how it's kind of developed. I have basically operated in enterprise businesses for a little while, and of course have been involved in a few CIO group therapy sessions as a result. One thing that I probably haven't had, and a lot of people online and viewing have not had the exposure to, is actually understanding the depth of the consumer experience for a consumer goods company. And how technology has sort of impacted that. I mean, we would have the typical examples of the ride-hailing apps and the mobile apps, etc. But if you think about a very large, I don't think a lot of people have that insight. So could you give us a little bit more, talking a little bit more about personalization, sort of customization for everything that's needed in the consumer space and the kind of sectors that you've had exposure to?
Yeah, it's very interesting, the question you asked, right? And, the way the industry is moving, a few years ago, it used to be about mass production, go to China, speed of production, that used to be the big thing, I don't know, 15, 20, maybe 25 years ago. All that has changed now, right? Everything is now about personalized and customized. It is how consumption is made, how marketing is made. It needs to be marketed to me, not to every person in my community or my or my, similar to me. It's to me, right? And it's not meaning just, change the top line and say, dear Manish, and the standard text applies, right? People now want it customized. To the extent, even manufacturing is going to that level of customization. I give you an example, even beauty products, the color of the makeup which a person wants needs to be customized to my skin, right? My skin is the Indian skin, which has been grown up in India, but is, lived in the US for 20 years. There's a pigmentation which has come up, and now it needs to be to my skin, right? The amount of oil I secrete, et cetera, et cetera. And where manufacturing is now going is, how do you take that view of your skin, my skin, and create the product to me, right? Which is a whole different level of personalization. We all talk about personalization on the web space was 5-10 years ago. But now it's down to manufacturing. Now it's down to how do I market? What my friends using is much more important than $1 million or $5 million campaign can do. So how do you harness that? I think that's where the industry is moving in the consumer.
And if you look at sort of technology playing a part in that, of course, you see that on an omni-channel strategy, specifically on mobile and web. But when you look at a large company and large consumer goods companies, they're going through quite a bit of a sea change in actually how they build their businesses and build their customer experiences, right?
Right. The customer experience no longer is about the tail end where you buy, you market and you buy, right? The customer experience now is from the manufacturing to the purchase, and the whole cycle begins, right? I want, the example I gave you, my skin with the amount of oil, et cetera, et cetera. How do you take my requirements to manufacturing, manufacture something for me, potentially even engrave my name on the bottle, right? And then ship it to me. But of course, I want it within 24 hours. And at every point of the way, I want to know, where is it, right? It has left the go down in Germany. Now it is crossing the border. Now it is coming to France. Now it is, et cetera, right? That level of personalization and high information exchange for the businesses and for the ITs, for the IT, CIO, CTO, the question is going to be, how do you help in your business transforming to that level of personalization and customization?
So I think, so two major takeaways. I think one is that, IT leaders and IT professionals and CIOs who are viewing this have taken to light that there's just a tremendous amount of depth that goes into changing the customer experience. And that's probably going to be a centerpiece for a lot of strategies that kind of develop. I think the second takeaway is they're probably searching right now to basically see how they can get personalized skin products. So thank you very, very much for giving us guidance for that, because that's probably inspired a whole bunch.
There's a startup waiting to happen right now.
I think we've seed invested it collectively, Manish. So, but we'll just watch this space, basically, depending on how the markets go. Let's move to more CIO-centric conversation in terms of how you operate as a CIO and how you look at trend points. So perhaps the first point is, let's talk a little bit about where the CIO position is when it comes to business strategy, kind of conversations that both you've been involved in. Really any guiding points that you can basically give. There's a lot of people online who've really tried to continue to basically build their careers. I know that I've really have built my career because a lot of people helped me along the way, and I was able to get guidance on what to do and what not to do. So some takeaways from that standpoint, at least from a business strategy standpoint, where the CIO role fits into that would be really insightful.
Yeah. You've heard a lot of talk about, the business strategy and the IT strategy needs to come together. And I think so. I'm not going to repeat the same things because everybody's read that, right? But let's take it one more step, right? And this is from a lot of mistakes I have made, which is where I learned from, right? I used to be earlier in my career, keep saying about, the business, when the business doesn't have a strategy, what does IT do, right? And over the years, I've learned business always has a strategy. If the business doesn't have a strategy, that's a dying business, right? So if you're in an industry which is a dying business, my advice would be quit and leave somewhere else, right? But if you are one of those high growing, or even stable businesses, they always have a strategy. So one of the business I used to be closely associated with was the lumber industry, paper industry. Their strategy forum is 70 years. The tree they're planting today will be harvested in 30 years. By the time the paper gets created, it's a 70-year window.
So I think, let me interrupt you there. It's probably not the right industry for a venture capitalist to basically be in. Is that what you're basically? Right. Okay, good. Just double checking.
And then technology, I heard Bomber talk about a number of times. My horizon is 10 years, 3 years ahead of me and 7 years behind, right? So the strategy window may change based on the two examples I gave, but the business always has a strategy. Now, the question for people like you and me in the IT forum is, how do you change your IT strategy to meet the business or help the business? Or better still, how do you adapt the business strategy to change the IT strategy, right? Is the IT strategy built on business, or is it to help the business? What the business is not thinking is, because my strategy is this, I need deployment of X technology. Business is not thinking that, right? The business is thinking about the business strategy, and CIOs and CTOs have to say, okay, if that is your strategy, here's how I can help you and accelerate your strategy or make your strategy real, or, maybe even go beyond the strategy which you asked for, right?
So one thing I would say is, as part of that strategy, I've been, again, both an advisor and a friend to a number of startups. I think I would argue they probably have done exactly what I told them not to do, and sometimes it's completely the opposite. Like, okay, whatever he's saying, we'll make sure that's. Thank you very much for that, and we'll kind of move on. I'm only half joking about that because I think a lot of companies have a very different view about how they work with startups. How do you look at working with startups, if you do, in terms of as part of your strategy, and what kind of guiding points could you give there?
Yeah, once again, it's the business strategy, the business requirements, which drives me to work with a company, right? Whether that company is a startup or whether a company is a large organization, is probably decision number 2 or 3 or 4, right? So the first thing is, and I'll give you one example to show how this process I think through, right? The first thing I think about is, what is the business to be resolved? What is the business need? And does my business, right? Then who can solve that? Then are you a startup? And if you are, here's what I do. If you are a large organization, here's what I do, right? Let's talk about one example, which again is a good space for the VCs to invest in. Today, a large number of our employees are mobile employees. We are getting away from brick and mortar. You have to go to an office to work anywhere you want, right? And all these mobile offices and things like that have Wi-Fi, et cetera, but they don't have wireless charging. So a business strategy is make the employee ubiquitous. They can work from anywhere. To do that, I need mobile charging. I cannot find a large company to work with which can give me mobile charging. Everybody in that space is a startup. So does that deter me? No, it doesn't, because the business need is there. Now, if it was a Microsoft, let's say a large company, Microsoft giving me the solution, right? Legally, I would go one direction. You can own the IP, da, da, da. If it is a startup, which may or may not exist 6 months from now, I go another way in terms of IP and ownership. But that doesn't decide whether I do the thing or not. Right? Similarly, just because Microsoft has a large solution doesn't mean I will adopt, and a startup I will not adopt. It always starts from what is the business need, because I can help the strategy.
So I think one of the things I can take from that is it's really about the alignment of fixing a business problem and really aligning with kind of and how that problem really fits into a larger goal that you as a CIO is helping drive to actually transform and fix.
I will take it one more step, Yusuf. The business problem, does that business problem even align to the business strategy? Right? I mean, you and I have been in the business long enough. We know there are hundreds of problems to be solved, but we can do only 5, or whatever the number is, right? Anything more than one hand is probably too big, right? Now, which 5 am I going to pick is alignment to the business strategy. Then how do I solve that problem is alignment to the technology and the business problem. And the third step is which companies can give this. And last but not the least is, are you a startup? Then I go one direction. Are you not a startup? I go another.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about some of the trends and innovations that are typically happening. Definitively in 2018, I would probably argue a large part of 2017, one of the top inquiries and top focus areas that a lot of companies and CIOs specifically were focusing on was around automation, and that kind of built into machine learning. And now, of course, a large subset of things that compromise AI or are part of the AI kind of spectrum is something that people are looking into very, very effectively. There's a lot of skepticism, there's a lot of excitement about it, but I do fundamentally believe that 2019 will be a great opportunity to be able to really impact businesses. Could you give your take on how you see at least machine learning as from a trend standpoint and where you see effectiveness?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit. It may be interesting to step back a little bit from machine learning and see, my view of how things have come, because that will tell us where it is, my view of where it is going to move forward, right? So I think the whole journey started with maybe about 2008-9, when the last downturn happened. There was a big interest in, cost cutting and reduction. One trend, of course, was low-cost labor market, which dried up very quickly, right? It's still going on, but I don't think anybody is rushing to go do the low-cost labor market, right? The next way of doing that same, because the downturn was there, the business need existed, but for a lower cost, was how do I automate? And that gave birth to what we are calling machine learning and all of that technology today. Initially, it was all about speed in the supply chain. So you can get things faster, supply chain industry came in, lots of technology got evolved. And now people are saying, okay, the whole business analytics of logical if then else go, I think that is maturing, right? But where are I don't know the if then else, right? And that's where I think machine learning is starting to come in, right? So, weird correlations exist, which you and I cannot see, even with a large number of data set. And we need deep learning, we need machine learning to show us where those data correlations exist, right? I found some very interesting statistics, which is, and if this existed in the days when Michael Jordan was playing, Michael Jordan used to play from the left of the court, he would score 20 to 25% more points than from the right side of the court. Now, the court, if you look at it, is evenly balanced and everything is the same. What do you mean you can score more from one side and not the other? But if those data points, and nobody knows, why that is, but we have lots of data set to prove that is the case. If that existed 10, 15 years ago when Michael Jordan was at the Cream, you can see the strategy of all the coaches would be, we start playing from this side, but we take the, if we are trailing, we go on the other side, et cetera, right? That is where machine learning is starting to help us now. So once again, I think, I go back, right? What does the business need is going to trump what the technology is. And the second thing is, does the business need that level of automation? So I give you, this is something which John Paul, our CEO, has openly talked about. So nothing very secretive inside information. Our need today is to make the supply chain much faster. We are not in a perishable good. So our focus has not been on making the supply chain faster. So what salespeople predict is what I'm going to produce and speed up that automation. At this point, can I say I'm going to apply machine learning? I think that's like, we have a sledgehammer where I really need a small hammer, right? So I'm going to apply business analytics, supply chain, but for an automated driving industry, where manual, we've done everything there is, the need is to get rid of drivers or reduce the level of drivers and automate. Yeah, machine learning can be helpful there. So which industry are you in, and do they need that level of automation?
Right. Okay. I think one of the things that people in both buzz and hype kind of miss is sometimes the obvious. Having worked in the enterprise system space, I tried to kind of honestly half joke sometimes that I said, I've got a news flash for everyone. The cloud is actually built on hardware. And some people are like, kind of shocked that this was actually a reality, that it's actually, there's actually hardware that goes into actually building out clouds. And the same thing applies to machine learning and analytics. You've really got to be able to do that at scale with large amounts of data sets, and being kind of data at the heart of kind of a large part of the business strategy that sort of goes in. I'm just trying to understand the volumes of data that you basically deal with and have exposure to. It just must be, what are the challenges that kind of go with that?
Yeah, the volume of data is interesting. But like I said, I think that also the related question is, do we need that level of automation sophistication yet, right? And maybe the answer in some industries is yes. Maybe the answer in some industries is we can solve a lot more problems which are related to the business strategy by just analyzing the data which we already have.
I guess my question is more centered on, as much as it is about automation as it is about the customer experience, personalization, all the volumes of data that you need to be able to go through. Both piping that, putting structures in place, and then actually making sense and having a business outcome of that must be a pretty substantial challenge.
It is. It is. I mean, you've read, and we have read amount of data which gets generated every day, every minute.
Yeah.
And by the, another 5 years, the amount of volume of data which will be there, right? So the data itself is a huge asset. And I think where businesses have to transform is, how do you utilize that data in decision-making, in business strategy, in business analytics, machine learning, apply these technologies and almost make data the blood of the business, right? So it's flowing everywhere. We all have lots of data. I mean, I can give you the amount of terabytes and terabytes of data we store. I'm sure every industry has that. But are we utilizing it? And that, I think, is going to be another big trend, which I see coming, right? The data converted to strategy, right? And then reconverted back, utilizing the data into operations, execution.
That's great. So let's move into more the CIO community, and this probably will be the group therapy part of it. So I know I've got my Kleenex, and should you feel free to project and emote as you see fit. from a career advice standpoint, you've seen the CIO role, you've been a transformational CIO and continue to basically be. Some sort of takeaways, at least from people who are both building up their careers, or at least building up the careers both as CIOs and others who want to basically learn from each other. And any immediate takeaways or at least guiding points that that you could share.
Yeah, some of the questions which I was reading in your in the pre-read, the questions which came in, right, is there were two themes which came out. So I'm going to address those two themes, and then if there's others, we can take that, right? The first set of questions were aiming around how do you get to a CIO or a CTO, right? And it's, I mean, the exec recruiters are going to not like what I'm going to say. So I'm hoping there's no exec recruiter who's listening to this. The majority of it works by the network you and I have, the people who are aspiring to be, right? The networks are the one who is going to pull it. And my experience in a number of places is your network invites you to go interview for a certain role. And then, of course, you have to go and compete, right? So it's never put on a platter and given to you. You have to go compete for it. But the first ticket to entry is your network is pulling you. And I can go through my history.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I think one thing I would say is if it actually is put into on a platter, then that should be a concern.
That should be a major concern, right? Because, yeah, exactly. Then you are getting it for the wrong reason.
Like, come on over. No, it's dark in here. Don't worry about how dark it is. Like, it's okay. And you're like, I'm not sure this is a good thing, but okay.
Exactly. So the first thing which I would tell is, do you have the network, right? Do you have the network to get pulled? And if so, are you getting pulled? And then are you interviewing? And, you still have to go compete, so I'm not making it easier in any way, right? But gone are the days, I think, where it used to be advertised on a newspaper and the newspaper would come. Even the executive networks or the exec recruiters, they're basically building that network and inviting you, to go interview for those, right? The second theme I talk about, or I've read, is if you are a new CIO, CTO who've already arrived, now what do you do? And you're not one of those who's been promoted from inside. And once again, what I'm going to tell you is based on a few mistakes I've made in my career. So I'm hoping some of the listeners can learn from it and not make the same thing.
Well, before you say that, what I will, I'm listening intently because I've always been the first CIO for a company. And so I'm not sure if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I just know it is a thing. So I know there's a lot of things that you kind of inherit. You're like, that's kind of interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's kind of entertaining, to be perfectly honest, but I'd love to hear at least some of the things that you've observed.
Yeah. The first thing I would suggest for a new person to get in is build your network internally and have the strength to stand on it, because you will make mistakes, right? And you will have to say no. And the question, I think, will be, does your network have the strength to say and listen to no and bear those mistakes and give you another chance, right? My previous job, I was invited, I interviewed, I got in, I competed, and the network existed for a while. But the mistake I made was I focused that relationship on the network to a very few people. And once those dried out, the strength wasn't there, right? And that's my advice to new people is broaden your network and deepen your network. So it's no longer dependent on 1, 2, 3 people. It's on a complete wide network, internally and externally, right? And that's the same advice I will give to somebody aspiring to be one, is build your network and build the strength. Because once you have the strength and the network, everybody in the senior community will tell you, we learn from our mistakes. So when you do your mistakes, network should ask you, what did you learn? What are you not going to do? Let's move on. Instead of saying the network strength is in there. And then the question becomes, why did you make the mistake? And let's replace so that we can get somebody else to, learn from the mistakes. So the advice I would give is, continue your network and the strength. And the strength is both breadth and the depth.
Well,
And we often in our jobs get so engrossed in the day-to-day, making the changes, making the next technology, making this, that we forget that is almost as important, if not, I might argue, even more so.
Well, I think what I would like to basically say, and I would take this as a compliment, is as this is getting published and people are viewing this, your followers are only increasing on Pulse right now. So that's just wary of that. But I think take it as a compliment more than anything else, because people are building their network because they're literally practicing what you've just preached.
Excellent.
I've got a final question, because you worked at global companies, and people are now experiencing this because of just I think one of the common trends that or at least the common issues that I'm seeing amongst the CIO community is really about talent acquisition and then talent retention. And then a large part of that is being able to manage global teams. It's just managing teams in different functions and new functions that you're basically building up, whether it may be a innovation group, maybe it's a data analytics group, it's a growing security group that sort of comes into place. Your experience of having managed kind of global teams and remote teams, what's worked and what hasn't worked?
Yeah, there's a lot of things which I've gathered over the years. And some of the standard things which we think about, don't apply when you are bringing talent on or keeping talent. The amount of money, the amount of stock, the amount of benefits, free car, materialistic things don't keep you. They can interest you for a day, maybe a two, maybe a month, and then what, right? But what keeps people going back is when work starts to matter. When you are making a difference, when people know, even the receptionist who's picking up the phone 100 times a day, or maybe 100 times an hour, I don't know, which industry you're in, does that long term? Why are you doing that, right? And what experience are you creating? And how does that fit into the bigger picture, right? Now, that is what keeps people motivated for a long time, right? And our challenge for as CIOs, CTOs, or bigger still, the CEOs, is making sure everybody in the organization understands how their job fits into the big picture. And without that small puzzle, the big picture is incomplete. And that motivates people across the world, right? Whether it is, French person, whether it is German, whether it's Asian, Indian, startup, the different phases may be different speeds. California, it might be much faster because everybody's running at 200 miles an hour, might be a little slower here in France. But I think the key theme always is, does the work matter? And do I know where does it fit in?
Well, last question, 2019 coming up, any CIO resolutions or any personal resolutions you wish to share with the thousands of people viewing right now that could hold you to account?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of resolutions, a lot of people, the key thing which I've already talked about, one key thing which I've already talked about is, get closer to the business and understand what is it that the business needs and how are you solving their problem, right? I've said it a number of times, and I'm sure your listeners, our listeners will have said it a number of times, is, the business doesn't understand the strategy or does not have a strategy. And I used to say this, what is the business strategy for adopting blah technology? Wrong question. What is the business strategy, and, is a business strategy, and how is my adoption of certain technology going to help that strategy? And if the answer is yes, then it's only communication after that. And the business is suddenly behind it. So first resolution will be, how do I get closer to the business, and yet closer to the business? The second resolution, which, we've not talked about, is security, right? Especially with the amount of data we talked about, especially with the amount of mobility we talked about, how do we keep that secure? And once again, something which I'm going to say may not be loved by people in California. Security is still, a lot of it is about the basics, or actually not doing the basics, or doing the basics, whichever way you look at it, right? Positive or negative. Am I doing my patch management? Am I doing my, strengthening the endpoints? Am I? And yes, there are advanced technologies which can take care of all the other stuff. But first, it's about the basics. And I think I'm amazed at how many places I see, the basics are not done. Right. And that's what causes the weakest link.
Yeah, I think one thing I would say is that having had exposure to the cybersecurity space, both operationally and then working for a leading vendor, it's a very common thing to say. One is that the actual top 3 threats, threat vectors that you tend to see in a number of surveys really center on social engineering, things where phishing attacks, awareness, like, it is the vulnerability around just being able to protect your inbox and the endpoint and securing that, but then also going deeper in. So there's a lot of foundational stuff which continues to basically be kind of at the center of operations from a security standpoint, irrespective of you being in a security organization. I think security fundamentally is everybody's problem. It's not just part of the security.
I agree. I agree. I agree.
Well, so first of all, thank you so much for making the time. I wish you nothing but the best, both for a great holiday break, but also for 2019. And I'm sure all of our viewers and listeners have really appreciated your insights. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Yusuf. And thank you for conducting this. This was great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, perfect. Guys, thank you so much.